During the Infrastructure and Community Investment Committee meeting held on May 31st at Barrie City Hall, three key presentations were delivered. First, consultants from the IBI and ECRADIS group presented an update to the Barrie Waterfront Strategic Plan. Three primary objectives were highlighted: enhancing access to waterfront parks and trails, effectively managing waterfront use and vehicular demand, and championing climate adaptability alongside environmental protection. A total investment of $21 million is designated for short-term projects scheduled between 2024 and 2028. For the medium term, from 2029 to 2033, an allocation of $24.3 million has been set. Lastly, long-term developments set for 2034 and beyond will receive $29.8 million. These investments are in sync with the evolving needs of the city of Barrie. Second, Dennis Carr, partner at Dillon Consulting, presented the Transit's new network vision. The update was triggered primarily by the need to adjust the transit network for the new Allendale Mobility Hub, changes in the post-pandemic travel behaviors, and the success of Barrie's Transit on Demand Services pilot. If the Council adopts the new 2025 network, a two-phased implementation is proposed. Phase 1 in 2024 includes the introduction of the express route network, expansion of certain transit on demand zones, and the improvements to the specific fixed route services. Phase 2 in 2025 will finalize most proposed modifications. Finally, the city staff discussed asset management for city's over $7 billion worth of assets. The assets not yet covered in previous plans total over $1.5 billion and include facilities and parks. To accommodate population growth, the city plans to invest more than $400 million in new facilities over the next decade. Maintaining current service levels for outdoor recreation facilities will require an additional $26 million investment in new assets over the same period. However, a $3.3 million annual gap exists between planned expenditures and the necessary renewals for parks and outdoor recreation. In addition, operating budgets will increase from $25 million to nearly $34 million by 2032 due to new and expanded assets. Please use the timestamps provided to navigate to the sections of interest within the video.
I will now call the Infrastructure and Community Investment Committee meeting to order. This meeting is being held in person and electronically in accordance with the Municipal Act. Seeing that we have no public meeting or open delegations this evening, we will move right into the presentations. There are three presentations this afternoon. Before we start, I would like to change the order of business to have agenda items 7.1 concerning the Barrie Transit Network, our new network, 7.2 concerning the Facilities, Parks and Recreation Asset Management Plan, and 7.3 concerning the Waterfront Strategic Plan update to be considered at the same time as their presentations for members of committee and council in attendance to ask questions together. Are members of the committee in agreement with this approach? Excellent. So I'm going to move to the first presentation, and it's my understanding that we're going to also switch the order of presentations just given availability at the moment and some people running behind. So I'm going to move in. The first presentation tonight is concerning the Waterfront Strategic Plan update. I will now call upon Wendy Lovenmark, the landscape architectural planner, to approach the podium to say a few words and to introduce the presenter, Trevor McIntyre, the Global Director of Placemaking with Arcadis IBI Group.
Good afternoon, Chair Councillor Hamilton, Mayor Nuttall, Deputy Mayor Thompson, Councillor Rietma, and Councillor Nagusi. It's an honor and a pleasure to present to you today the outcome of a year and a half of stakeholder and community consultation. With me today is Manager of Parks Planning, Mr. Kevin Bradley, and our talented consultants from the IBI Arcadis Group, led by Mr. Trevor McIntyre, Global Director of Placemaking, and members of his team, Ms. Astrid Greaves and Ms. Rachel Vez. We'd like to extend our thanks to Barrie's residents, community organizations, Indigenous voices, external agencies and city staff who participated in the process and shared their comments. I now invite Trevor to please come forward and present the highlights of the 2023 Waterfront Strategic Plan update. Thank you.
This way. Yeah.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for having us here today. And also thank you for shifting the order. It works well for us as well. Very pleased to be here. As Wendy stated, we have been honored to work on this project for the last year and a half, or feels like a little longer than that. We're closer to 2 years on that. We've worked very closely with the team. My two colleagues, Astrid and Rachel, who are here, have been a key part of that team, along with another part of our team in Toronto and others who have been involved. And we've worked closely with Kevin and with Wendy on this process. So the slide presentation is relatively brief. I'll go through it and explain kind of the process that we've gone through, the conclusions that we've made, and then I'd love to take any questions that you might actually have. So the agenda of what I'll share with you is really these 5 points. So number 1, the simple introduction about the process and how the process fits in terms of the context of the work that was done previous to this plan. Secondly, what we heard through our consultation process. Third, the visions, the pillars and the goals that we actually established for the waterfront as we move forward. And then the strategic priorities that we set. And then I'll discuss a bit about the implementation as the plan moves forward. So the key purpose of that project, and there was work that was done previously, the 2015 plan, and that plan was a very comprehensive plan. But at the time that we started this issue, it was ready to be updated because of a number of different factors. So one of the key factors was that Barrie is a growing community, and as more and more people are actually using the waterfront, we need to anticipate the stress and the need for stewardship of the water and proper planning of the waterfront. Secondly, we were going through a post-pandemic waterfront, and during that time, as you all know, a lot of people from Toronto and from other areas came in to start to use the waterfront because of the convenience. And so the impact on the facilities that you have was great. Third, there was a big shift in some of the societal trends, things that happened with respect to the way people actually use the space, the way people work and live, and their lifestyle changes, which also impacts the times of day that they would be using a facility like this, and then flexible and actionable plan. And the reason that last point is that we really don't want to do a plan that sits on a shelf and is a stagnant plan, but we should have a plan that we can continue to evolve over time and update over time. So key to that along the bottom as well, to protect and enhance the waterfront, because it is a key destination. So there is a measure of stewardship, but also a roadmap for the future of what services and facilities and activities would happen on the waterfront. So as we went through the process, we recognized from early on in the process, there were really kind of 3 distinct shores around Kempenfelt Bay. The North Shore, the West Shore, and the South Shore, and that those issues and those areas were quite different. The neighborhoods were different, and the impact of things like traffic and the land use around those areas was something that actually had to be factored in as we looked for each of the 3 shorelines. We went through a very thorough engagement process, and that process, as you can see mapped out here, began January on a very cold winter day that I remember hiking through the shoreline with the team from the city, and we had stakeholder engagement that actually started around that time. We had 2 major public information centers, one in March and one in June. We had 2 surveys, one in April and one in the winter. And during that time, what we heard was we heard over 200 community members who engaged in those discussions online with us, as well as responding in individual meetings, but also through survey results. There were 614 online survey respondents, and those we often talked with those people and answered questions within the PICs. And then 17 stakeholder groups that we consulted with over the course of 3 engagements. And so some of the key things that we heard were that the waterfront should be green and should be accessible year-round during all 4 seasons. There were very specific points which looked at, for instance, Spirit Catcher Park and what could be the things that could do to revitalize Spirit Catcher. Another thing was about how people actually came to the waterfront. Did they come by vehicle? Where did they park? Did they come by bike? Did they walk in? And what were the things that we could actually do to better plan for the way people actually accessed and used the facilities on a day-to-day basis? The other thing we heard is that there were things that had been started already that needed to continue. So things like wheelchair accessible picnic tables and permanent shade umbrellas and things like that were things that should continue to happen, and for certain reasons, which we'll get to in a few moments. Greater access to the water and waterfront views with the trails. So there's a great trail system that's around there, but sometimes the trail system doesn't actually let you get right down to the water, especially if there are people who actually have limited mobility. They might be in a stroller, they might be in a walker, or it might be in a wheelchair, for instance. And then parking was another issue that came up, which we addressed. And one of the things about parking is that it's a difficult thing to just solve the city's parking issues on the back of the waterfront plan. But what we can do is we can plan for better access with active transportation, with other ways to get people to the water easily, and allow them to use it on a regular basis. So what came through the vision as we were kind of distilling the feedback from those 600 plus feedback sessions is that really there were 3 distinct experiences, and one being inclusivity. And so it should be designed for everyone, the 8 to 80 sort of principle, that kids should be able to use it, that seniors should be able to use it, and that everybody in between, in terms of stakeholder groups and communities, and whether informal or formal, had access, and they could actually be, there could be inclusive opportunities for them. Second was resilience, and this is along the lines of many of the global goals that are happening around the world right now, in terms of the resilience, in terms of changes in climate, and changes in temperature, and changes in the way people actually would use the space. And then the third is activated, and activated just means that it's not enough to just build things and assume that people will come, but you actually need to program those activities and create other reasons for people to come down, to create a true daytime and nighttime safe a series of activities for the public and the visitors. Just looking at those 3, if we just summarize quickly sort of what the goals were that came out of those. Under inclusivity, it's about accessibility, which I spoke about already. People with all levels of accessibility should be able to use the waterfront. 2, safe and safety. Everyone should be able to get their safety, and there should be adequate light levels, that if they're using it in the evening hours, the public trails should be lit in such a way that people remain safe and feel safe as they're using. And then diversity, just diverse cultural uses, different people's backgrounds, and the way they actually gather with friends and family dictates that there has to be flexibility in the programming of those types of spaces. Next, resilience. Restorative landscapes. So protection and enhancement of waterfront ecologies. We know it's important. The shorelines have to be protected, We realize that there's certain animals and species that will be along there, but we also have to protect those, but we also have to realize that humans, and in some cases, like on the west shoreline, there are huge numbers of people that are actually using it. So the impact needs to be monitored and directed safely. And then stewardship, we treat that as one big system, and it's important that the whole system, in terms of the water, in terms of the shoreline, and the drainage, the stormwater drainage that's entering into the lake and all that, needs to be seen as one ecosystem. We go into an activated. I talked about active programming. So things need to be connected. And often what happens is we look at isolated little situations, but we don't connect the dots. And so we don't get people going to where we actually would like them to go. And that's something we heard numerous times from the people we consulted with. It has to be attractive, so unique and memorable spaces. And again, their Barrie waterfront is distinct. And whether you're living here and you use it every day, or you're coming up for the weekend, or you're just first time you're visiting the city, there should be something that's memorable about it that reminds you that this is Barrie. This is not Toronto. This is not another city, but this is Barrie and the Barrie brand and identity. And then flexible, I talked about flexible spaces and the importance of those for all the different groups. So the 10 strategic priorities that came out of it are shown on this slide. I won't go into them all in detail, but I'll just highlight a couple of them. Because of these 10 strategic priorities, when we went to the public and we said, which are the ones that are most important to you? We had people kind of vote on it and feedback. And we think that all 10 are important, otherwise they wouldn't be here. But the 3 that came out as being highlighted by the kind of public vote and the community was enhance the access points to the waterfront parks and trails. So that sends a message that says we really want to use it, but sometimes we can't get there, and sometimes we need improvements for how we actually access that. Secondly, number 5 here, manage the waterfront use and the vehicular demand. And we know that there are times that things are very, very busy and people struggle with finding places to park. So we should be thinking strategically about other ways to actually get them there. Better trail connections, active transportation, better walkability, and perhaps shuttles and other solutions that actually help people access the water. And then the third was promote climate adaptability and environmental protection. And so that was looking at the resilience side, and a very important message to the feedback that we heard. When we start looking in detail at this, what we did then is we mapped out all these points. And if you looked at this map in closely as you read the report, you can kind of go through and you can see all the active points where the trails and the accessible connections are made and where they create different opportunities. And as we went through those, we didn't detail design every one of those opportunities, but anything that was worth mentioning as part of an overall plan was noted on here. And so the overall goal and those priorities was what we're trying to capture, but then we identified individual pieces as we went through on each of the north and the west and the south shore. We looked at sample recommendations like things like undertake the North Shore Trail Master Plan to increase the accessibility. That's something we've heard numerous times, and I know the city is working hard on that already. Implement a waterfront bike parking program. I mean, we can't ask everybody to come down there and bring their bikes if they don't have a place. They can lock up their bikes and keep them safely. And if there are not trails that allow them to come with young kids, for instance, and ride safely without having big breaks in the trails. And then third, implement a waterfront gateway features to celebrate entry into the trails. And again, this deals with design and branding. And what are the things that we can actually do to make it distinctively Barrie? And what are the opportunities? Are there other things that you have as goals that you are trying to work on? And all those, do they contribute to the overall vision and the kind of comprehensive view of the waterfront? Second, in terms of the climate adaptability, environmental protection, I spoke about that a little bit, but just some examples. Undertake and implement the Gable Shoreline Restoration Plan. If there's areas where shoreline erosion is happening and you have to fix those areas, you do have to keep on top of those. It ends up costing way more money to ignore them and then have to come in and do a major retrofit. So these are things that are being looked at on a regular basis in terms of maintenance, but also in terms of planning new areas and improving accessibility. We'll show some examples of that. And then undertake and implement the Wilkins Walk Restoration Plan as another example. And then prioritize climate adaptability and environmental protection through the park planning processes. And part of this isn't just about what the city does, but it's about the message that's communicated to the public. And what's important there is that the young groups that are out there, whether it's scouts or whether it's school groups or the Indigenous population that's down there, they're actually using the space and they realize that there are sort of common goals that they should actually follow in order to help contribute to the implementation of the plan. Manage the waterfront use. We talked a little bit about that with the active transportation. And so, you know, increase the destinations. There are specific destinations and those do create demand for parking. So what are the strategies for actually allowing other places to park? What are the other ways to improve active transportation and reduce the amount of parking? So those are all things that are being studied. Explore pickup and drop off areas to reduce the long-term parking. That's one way that we can actually have people parking further away, but we can actually, they have to be able to come down close and drop off a cooler or drop off younger, less mobile people. And then encourage the build out of all ages and abilities network of active travel connections, which I think I've already spoke about. So the next thing we did in the process is, because we had identified so many areas, we thought was probably important to actually help the city think about what are the priorities by actually reaching out to the community and the stakeholder groups and ask them, what do you think is the most important thing in each of the focus areas, the North and the West and the South Shore? And what we heard back sort of as the people's choice vote was that Spirit Catcher Park was something that they saw as being a big destination and something that would help revitalize a whole area. And if the other trail connections, they're not less important, but they're important, but you actually always have to have a destination to try and get to draw the people there. Secondly, Sam Kinsella Park. And we know there's some other programmed ideas about how the space can be used. And some of the space which is used for parking may be changed and used for other market type uses and such. And so we came up with ideas for how we might actually do that. And these are the illustratives that you see here are not defined designs per se, but they're just to show the public and yourselves that what are the kinds of ideas that we're trying to achieve here. And in each of the diagrams, we go through and we highlight what those areas are in a way of demonstrating the plan. These haven't gone through a detailed design process. They don't have budgets specifically attached to them, and they don't have a program, but each of those programs will have to come back to council for your approval. And then if I look at the implementation timeline, the way to best look at these in our view is to look at sort of windows of opportunities. And so we looked at short-term, medium-term, and long-term. Short-term being 24 to 28, medium-term being 29 to 33, 2033, and then long-term being beyond that point. Now, there are certain projects that already have been discussed and are looked at in higher level of detail, and some of them are more the short-term projects. There's other opportunities that are fitting into the medium term that are being discussed, but maybe there's not quite as much detail known on them. And then there's long-term ideas and concepts. And each of those, as they come forward, they may involve a union or joint venture between the development community and someone who has an ambition to do something and what the city wants to do. And each of those will have to go through its course with input from you to see whether it fits, whether it actually works in terms of the transportation, and whether it actually supports the goals of the overall plan. So that was a way for us to sort of keep the plan fluid, in that you can update the plan on a regular basis and plug things in. And there might be opportunities you're talking about already, and there might be opportunities that come along next week. But you always have to sort of take the approach that you think big and start small, but you build towards a common vision. And short-term implementation. So what are some of the ideas that you see there? They fit, if you look down the left-hand side, some of those things are being planned and studied, and there's feasibility studies that are going on for those opportunities along the left. Some of them are areas that are more upgrades and area revitalization. If there's something that gets washed out and it needs to get repaired in terms of a trail, that has to happen on a more regular basis. And then strategic physical improvements are the things that just don't work, and we know it's an issue, and you want to attack those on a higher priority or as funding is available. And then the strategic land acquisition, the fourth category there is really just looking for other opportunities that come about. And as you know, there might be people that have land that want to swap land or sell land, or there might be opportunities that the city can acquire land in order to actually fix something where there is a broken linkage. And so each of those sort of short-term opportunities come out of those four brackets on the left. In terms of capital cost forecasts, and we use the word forecast here because these are not sort of approved budget numbers. They do include budgets that might be approved already for some plans that fit into these brackets. But we kind of took a look at the short term, the medium term, and the long term, and whether they fit in those four categories down along the left side, and then totaled up what the capital forecasts are at the present time. So as you see, short term, 21 million, medium term, about 24.3 million, and then long term, 29.8. Now that obviously doesn't address opportunities that are not on the table right now. And if something new comes along, you look at it and you think about how much planning and design has to go into that. And is it a long-term thing where there's fundraising over a number of years? Or is it something that you can actually do immediately with the resources you have? And I think this is my last slide, so bear with me here. But just to summarize the process we went through and to highlight some of the key points. Number one, this isn't us going away and dreaming about what we think should happen in Barrie. This is us working closely with the city staff, the other projects that are on, and the whole community, as you saw, the groups that were there. And so this allows for multiple touch points. I mean, the council will be involved as this plan moves forward, and it is a collaborative plan between the city staff and the community and yourselves, giving direction to it. The strategy is community-led, so the Barrie community key stakeholders were very involved in the process, and we listened very closely to them. We had many meetings, and aside from the meetings that I highlighted, we also had individual meetings with some of the stakeholder groups about specific ideas or concerns that they might have had. And then number three, the strategy strengthens the ongoing plans and initiatives. Again, we didn't want to throw out anything that had been done, but we thought it was important to acknowledge that and then build upon the plan, which is the 2015 plan and all the good work that's been done to date. So that's where we sit. And with that, I would welcome any questions or comments. And if I can't answer them, I will look to Wendy and Kevin to give some further support if there's a specific technical question that I may not know. So I open the floor to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. McIntyre, for the presentation. I think anyone who lives here can agree that our waterfront is the jewel of this city. Over the 40 plus years I've lived here, I've seen a number of transformations take place down at the waterfront, and I'm really excited and eager to see these ongoing revitalization efforts. So thank you for the presentation. I will open it up to questions from committee members first. And just a reminder that the committee members include Mayor Nettle, Deputy Mayor Thompson, Councillor Rietma, and Councillor Negusi. Any questions from committee members? Councillor Rietma.
I'll just start it off, but thank you for the presentation and for the report. I thought it was very interesting and very well done. I really appreciate that. One of the things that one of the goals that you set out, I think it was on slide 9, was being connected. And there were just a couple of questions that I had about that. One of them is, how do we better connect the waterfront to the rest of the city? I think that, you know, the waterfront standing on its own is terrific. But sometimes I wonder if it's connected to the rest of the city well enough. So I'd like your comments on that. Sure. The second one is, especially in the South Shore area, the waterfront's not terribly connected. Although on one of your slides, it showed like a waterfront something all the way along. And do you have any ideas for improving the connection along the water especially in the South Shore area?
Sure. Good question. And I think the answer to the question is probably 3 different answers to the question, because North, West, and South are all very different. North Shore, we have kind of 2 parallel systems. So you have people that might be riding along the road or walking along the road or dropping people off. And then they've got to make their way down. And then we have a trail that runs partway along, but the trail doesn't necessarily connect to the water. And one of the things we actually looked at is were there ways to create more access points? So more ways to connect the 3 sort of parallel systems. And I think that's a really, really important part of how people actually move. And the fact that, you know, after a rainy day, you should be able to go down there without slopping through mud and slipping and sliding down a bank and that sort of thing. So I think that's an important part of it. And there are solutions to how those access points can be redesigned. And I think we addressed some of those in some of our studies. On the west side, where the big impact is, a big impact in terms of numbers of people, the issue is a little different because people don't necessarily use the paths. Like every inch of the lawn areas is being used. And there's just so much activity that really part of the desire becomes like, how do you actually focus people onto certain paths so there's not so much wear and tear on the other parts? And how do you draw people to areas that are kind of, what I'll say, underutilized? So we got a couple of interesting points where a water management system, like stormwater, comes down and it comes through and eventually connects to the water. And some of those areas are these little ecological sort of habitats. And I think there's a clear message there, because those as bioswales are ways that you can take that water, you can flush that water through cattails and whatnot before it gets to the water's edge. And then you can educate the youth and the bird watchers and the other people who are using the park to how do you create a more diverse ecology there? Because the diverse ecology then draws people there, and you can actually start to dissipate. You can dissipate the people and move them to other less utilized places of the waterfront. So I think that's a big part of what we talked about on the west side. On the south, it's more of a land use issue, because you have a lot of neighborhoods, and you know, there's a bit of a feeling of ownership of access to the water, because neighborhoods, you know, you don't want massive groups of people coming through your neighborhood, parking on the streets, and the impact. And so we did look at that. We looked at were there places we could actually improve the access, and how would you do that? But you have to be all sensitive to the people that are there. And you don't want to start building big parking lots in the middle of neighborhoods and so I think there's some sensitivity there. There are also some very interesting environmental areas there that probably were not as well used until the pandemic. And then with the pandemic, more people had more time and interest, and they started using those spaces more. So the impact increases, and maybe the trails aren't wide enough, and maybe there aren't places to, park bikes and such that would encourage people to take bikes instead of driving cars and parking on the streets. So I think those are the kind of things that we tried to address through the report and through the studies. And we didn't solve every single one, but we did look at the key areas and try to solve those problems as a demonstration of how we could actually solve those. So is that useful?
Yeah, I think it is, and I agree with you. I mean, it's a real balancing act between sort of the needs and requirements of the natural environment, and a growing city right beside it. So yeah, okay, thanks.
Thank you. You're welcome. Yeah.
Deputy Mayor Thompson.
Thank you. Through you, Chair Hamilton. Thanks for the presentation. I might have missed it somewhere. It says that there was 220 community members, 614 online. Who were the 17 stakeholders? Like, I couldn't find that in the report.
Okay.
Like, was it more like neighborhoods associations or?
I'll see if we do. Wendy, do you want, or Rachel, or Astrid, you could take that if she can give you all 17.
If it's easier, I can get it as an email after and stuff. I don't need you to look through right now. So
through you, Chair Hamilton, to Councillor Thompson. We'll follow up with an email tomorrow morning.
yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, there was two different types of internal and external stakeholder consultations. A lot of involved service clubs, one smaller Indigenous group. Facilities. Are you looking for the internal groups or the external groups?
Both would be
Yeah.
a little bit help. Like I said, it doesn't have to be done on the floor right now. Like if I could just get a follow-up email tomorrow.
Yeah, we'll have a follow-up email to you tomorrow morning.
Perfect. And then just a follow-up. On the three areas, like, and I understand that with the interaction of, all the community members and the stakeholders, and I know the desire is to keep it very green, but it doesn't look like we have any like attraction, like a revenue source on the waterfront. It looked like a lot of parklands and which is fully understandable. The desire is to keep it as much of natural as possible. But I was just wondering, was there any look at, attractions that actually draw people to the waterfront?
Well, I can talk about that because part of it is the program comment that I meant, which is that many of the groups that we met with told us that they already are using the waterfront as in an organized fashion. I'll give you examples. The Indigenous community was actually very active and said, well, we typically do ceremonies here and here and here. These are the areas we come to, but it would be really nice if we had a special area that we could kind of call our own. And we would be willing to work with you to help kind of design that and create it and something we could call our own. As one example, I think in terms of the kind of environmental groups as well, and I'll say like bird watching groups and things. We heard about people that, well, we meet every Saturday morning and we go down and we watch birds, and we heard people that talked about winter usage and about going cross country skiing and using certain trails during the winter time. And with each of those, we thought about those, and then we thought about how could we better program those in order to actually provide for better winter use and better fall and spring use. We know that the use isn't really a challenge in the summertime, because if anything, there's almost too much use. But by better programming areas within, we could actually pull the people to different areas and help take the impact off areas where all the public sort of shows up at at one time on a Saturday afternoon. So with respect to like a big kind of a big revenue generating project, we didn't cite any sort of new invented projects, but we know there are some major projects, and the three that I showed were also ones that actually showed you know, investment and reorganization of those spaces. So, you know, Cancilla as a good example. And I think the one on the South Shore, the Minette one, is probably more reorganizing the programmed spaces. So having the right spaces there for people that are doing certain types of water sports, that they had a place they could actually set up their windsurfers and such.
I think your colleague might have had a follow-up or an
Yeah.
additional comment to make.
Sorry, is that Kevin?
Thank you,
Yeah.
Chair Hamilton. We're also focusing on small wins. So expanding our licensing program, for example, for the first time this year, we're going to be going out for winter licensing to the market for partners for snowshoeing, lessons, rentals, cross-country skiing, potentially ice fishing. It's an open call to the market to let the market come back and tell us what they think would be the most feasible. We're also looking at different types of events and strategies around what can be done on the waterfront, being careful of balance. We heard very loud and clear through the public consultation, especially with respect to too many festivals and too many summer weekends or restaurants actually on the water side. There was, the public was very cautionary to us on that. We are looking at an adventure playground, which other cities are starting to put in their major downtowns or on their waterfronts, which is probably 3 times the size, similar to what Jumpstart is doing with us in partnership with Painswick, potentially in the area of Centennial Park, which would be a major attraction. And we're also for the first time issuing a food services RFP, potentially licensing agreement in the fall, which will start to bring different types of food into different types, not just in the downtown, but potentially Minette's, Johnson's Beach, and other areas where we haven't had it before. Again, all just building momentum and kind of that inertia that you need before we move to investing in large scale projects. So hopefully that helps a bit.
Yeah, and just one comment, like, I'm not looking at big, I just like maybe a little bit of, you know, a balance, but I appreciate the report. Thank you.
Mayor Nettle.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Hamilton. Thank you for the presentation, and I caught the probably the back half of it, but there's, if you can go maybe back to one of the slides that showed the 3 separate areas, and specifically at the west end, is that possible to do?
I think Carl's just calling it up right now.
So one of the things that that we see here, I know you've kind of looked at a high level concept plan, kind of idea creation, maybe understanding for the public and members of council and our public service, what the potential is, right? Was there any discussion? We've seen, I see Mr. Bruton here today. We've seen the call for a either different or renovated facility for the Navy League and cadets. Was there any discussion into that? Because it strikes me as probably the marquee location for the entire waterfront in the city.
I think I'll let Kevin, because this was clearly a very key point, and it was actually discussed all the way through the process. So Kevin.
Thank you. Through you, Chair Hamilton, to Mayor Nuttall. We didn't have direct consultation with the Navy League of Ontario. We reached out on 2 different occasions to try and connect with them. We weren't successful. 2 or 3 members of the local Sea Cadets organization did participate in 2 of the PICs and potentially on the survey. What we've done at this point is carry forward the recommendations that were in the 2015 plan. You would see it in the implementation plan. It's rolled up into a larger project under the Spirit Catcher. The idea and the recommendation is to continue discussions with the Navy League of Ontario, who actually the city agreement is with, to find an appropriate, suitable location for the Sea Cadets operation on the waterfront. We can't unilaterally break the lease, the current lease that we have, which extends for at least another 24 years. But we were successful in the past, at least getting the building ownership back to the city and control of the property back, so that we could make some quick improvements, like removing the fence that was around the front that was a bit of an eyesore on the waterfront. But there is a commitment in the plan to continue to work with the Sea Cadets and then Levy Lake going forward.
And is there been any contemplation on where on the waterfront that would go? Because it sounds like that's what has been considered in the past.
In the past, there was a, through you, Councillor Hamilton, to Mayor Nettle. In the past, there was a much larger solution that we were looking at, which was kind of a shared water sport facility, a water sports excellent facility that would have rental space, programmable space, as well as the Sea Cadets place on the South Shore. Those conversations probably ended in about 2015. They hadn't moved forward since that time. We had looked at one other location, which we're carrying forward in this plan as a potential recommendation, which is Tyndale Park, which would be on the west end of the park potentially. We had earlier discussions with them at that time. The concern remains that anywhere within that the context of the West Shore is just too busy on the water and it's unsafe for their children. So the idea of Tyndale or potentially another location to examine, just only to examine, would hopefully address some of those concerns with those young children learning how to sail. Oh, and if I could, sorry, one other thing is we're also exploring programming and partnerships with the Barrie Yacht Club that would also include the Sea Cadets potentially.
Great. Yeah, I was the counselor when Tyndale Park was being bantered around for consideration. I can tell you what the answer in the neighborhood is very quickly if you'd like, but we might have to have beeping out for expletives at that portion of it. The idea on the South Shore for a grander, I don't know what the word was, it was used, a grander kind of water sports specialized facility, or even just the Sea Cadets. Is the contemplation somewhere around Allendale Station Park beside the current Memorial Park, Military Heritage Park, sorry?
For you, Chair Hamilton, it's actually, I always get my bearings wrong, we'll say further north, closer to the Tiffin boat launch in and around the Rotary Fish Habitat Island, kind of in that general area is what we were exploring earlier with the Sea Cadets. The slope, the grades and the slope conditions around the Military Heritage Park would be very expensive to work with those grades. At the time, the Sea Cadets were very positive about the other location that we're exploring. And as I mentioned previously, the talks just broke off at the time, just due to the scale of the project.
Okay, and just my, I guess my final, there was a slide, and I think it's maybe the next one or the one after, that goes into the funding requirements. 14. So this isn't in our capital plan. Is that correct?
Through you, Chair Hamilton, are you referring to the Sea Cadets facility specifically? Or
sorry, I changed the subject without telling you.
Oh, yeah.
So the capital costs associated from 24 to 28 are not in our capital plan, is what I just heard. Is that correct?
No, there are 7 projects that are forecast in the current capital plan. The 2 larger ones at this point are Heritage Park for around $11 million. And the Sea Cadets currently is around 8.2, I think, or 8.7. This plan recommends a significant uplift to that. Not Heritage Park, because the master plan was just approved in the last term of council, but the numbers used for the original Spirit Catcher Park, which include the iconic building and some other facilities, are 2013, 2014 cost estimates.
The $21 million here is already captured inside of our capital plan, or is not? Like, is it included?
Or
is this recommending an increase? Because and I'll say it during this master plan because there's going to be more presentations. The worst thing I think we can do is send a signal to the market to say we're increasing spending through a master plan on some things, but not have it in our capital plan that we're already struggling to meet. And so I worry if this is a $21 million increase over the next, call it 5 years, on this specific item, and then there's more further out from there. If these dollars and cents haven't been included in our capital forecasts, and we pass a master plan, we're essentially saying, yes, we're going to do it. And then we're going to get a capital plan now amended coming forward that says we're adding all of these items in, and we're having difficulty meeting our current requirements. You know, and I know these aren't the same dollars, so it's not exactly fair, but you think about the Southeast Recreation Center that Councillor Hamilton, Chair Hamilton, has spoken to me about every day since the election. And, you know, it was approved in 2008 for a 2013 build, and then 2013 for 2017 build, and 2017. I don't know what happened because I wasn't paying attention here. And we're into 2025, right? So I am cautious, Madam Chair, about approving master plans that approve spending, in a sense, for money we just don't have, and sending the wrong message to market.
Any comments to Mayor Nettles' comments from staff or the presenters today?
Through you, Chair Hamilton, approximately $13 million of that 20 million is in the current capital budget as a forecast.
Thank you.
Before I turn it over to non-committee members, I'm just going to make a quick comment myself, because I think what Deputy Mayor Thompson was getting at, and even what Mayor Nettle was getting at from dollars cents perspective. I appreciate the level of engagement and consultation that took place. It sounds like a lot of people who were engaged are the people who are already using the waterfront. And to me, I wonder if it's a bit of a missed opportunity, or if there's further opportunity to engage people who are not currently using the waterfront, right? How do we make this a tourist destination? What is the attraction? How can we utilize the waterfront to our economic advantage, right? And actually bring in money to support these ongoing revitalization efforts. So for me, that's a bit of a missing piece. I appreciated what you added in terms of some of the food stations and all of that. I do think that will be an addition, an attraction. And then also maybe it's just a question to staff, and maybe I can take it offline. It's just a matter of how do we measure outside use in the tourists? I mean, certainly we want to build a waterfront that's usable for residents of Barrie, but I think we have a huge opportunity from a tourism perspective. We talk here about accessibility and making the waterfront accessibility, transportation, shuttle buses, boats. I mean, there's a huge boating industry out there. And you know, I think Friday Harbor has been a very successful endeavor. They have tons of tourism there. We should have that here, right in Barrie, right within our city limits. So I do just throw that out there, probably just for general comment, but happy if you have any feedback on what I've said.
Thank you, Chair Hamilton. On the boating item specifically, there are two major projects that are recommended in the longer term of this plan. One is to actually look at how can we redesign the Marina Spit, look at the Marina Spit, even potentially relocating it to expand the current marina. The marina itself was excluded in large part from this because there's been so much other work done through corporate facilities. And we're actually just started kind of the internal discussions about looking at a similar type enlarged facility, similar to what Innisfil has done, but at a little bit grander scale at the Tiffin boat launch, again, to increase capacity for out-of-town boats and out-of-town visitors that would be coming in and visiting our city.
Great, thank you. Okay, I'll open it up to non-committee members who may have comments or questions. Councillor Sergio Morales.
Thank you, Chair Hamilton. In slide 14, there's a long-term 2034 plus projected capital cost forecast of 29.8 million. Could you just go over what, at a somewhat high level, what those numbers are for? Because I followed the short term and makes sense because you're in slide 12, you're outlining the short term, but in long term, in slide 12 for long term, you just have what the waterfront continue to evolve to meet the needs, et cetera. Like it's just generic language. And then you have a $29 million allocation to generic language. So I'm just wondering what you envision.
Through you, Chair Hamilton. The big drivers for that, I'm just looking at my notes. One is not the Spirit Catcher Park itself, but the iconic building that we've carried forward from 2015 that would go on to the sites of the Sea Cadet site potentially. I think it was in around 12 million of that 29. Tyndale Park revitalization, just off the top of my head, I think was around 3 to 3.5 million. Johnson's Beach was around $3 million, which includes an expansion of the beach in both locations, trying to address capacity issues that we have at Centennial Beach, Minette's. South Shore Park, which is about a $3.5 million to $4 million recommendation. And the Marina Spit project, I think that we were carrying around 8 million. So those are the big drivers within that longer term number.
Through you, Chair, what was that first one you said? You said
The Spirit Catcher iconic building.
iconic building?
Well, in our mind, it's, we were looking at, in collaboration with the market precinct, a major waterfront building that would have lease space, potentially provide city administration space. There was conversations about Tourism Barrie potentially relocating in that location. It would have marina space, but for transient boaters, again, better services, better showers, better backland, all those type of things.
So waterfront flex building.
Correct.
Okay.
And
And that
event
would
space.
go at Spirit location or at the Sea Cadets location?
That was right now in plan, and it is contemplated on the site of the Sea Cadets.
Okay. Thank you. And so back to slide 14. I see here that the short term it's being recommended or at least brainstormed that the feasibility study take 4 years, and then the medium term, the actual construction development take another 4 years. But then now I'm hearing that the financing is 2034 plus, so it might be longer. Is there a reason why your team is forecasting that it's going to require 4 years to do a feasibility study and then 4+ years to actually construction implementation? Because this is just like the story of the Sea Cadets building. This is it gets passed on almost from generation to generation.
Yeah.
And it's, from my perspective, but maybe I'm missing something, it's just very frustrating seeing a 4-year feasibility study for something like this.
Through you, Chair Hamilton. Just for clarity, those are 4-year time horizons. We did not put specific years into the capital plan. So that doesn't mean it's going to take 4 years, Councilor Morales, to do the project. It's just going to happen within that time frame. Many of these projects will be multi-year programs. They're very complicated projects. There will be a lot of pre-design work, feasibility analysis, especially if we're looking at bringing in different types of private partners into that through negotiation. And then facilities and parks like that sometimes will take 18 months, if not longer, to build.
Okay, perfect. And the other comments I want to say is whoever your graphic designers on this team deserves a raise. Really good graphics and way to communicate this information. And I kind of concur with Deputy Mayor Thompson's point. I was on the council, and I think I'm the only member of council that was on the 2014 council that found that balance between natural. I remember the comments. It was not, do you want naturalization or do you want activation? Do you want the Disneyfication? Remember, CEO Press, that was the word, Disneyfication of the waterfront, or do you want to just leave it alone? If I remember correctly, someone correct me if I'm wrong, the feedback from the public came in pretty in the middle, give or take 7 percentage points on either end. So the proposed, what we adopted essentially was naturalization where there's critical mass, and then activation on pinch points across the waterfront. So hearing that we might go out to the market to see if there's interest in coming back with boat launches, snowshoes, that kind of thing. Maybe we actually build infrastructure to make it worth their while. So if it's for a boat thing, maybe it's benches for them to put on for the snowshoes, for them to put the snowshoes. Maybe it's a warming station. Maybe it's something like that where they can, or a wash station. So that will, I think, maybe go in conjunction with what we want to do, which is to a degree commercialize the waterfront without overdoing it. So that's more a comment than a question. Thank you.
Yeah, if I can just comment on that, it's a fair comment. We did have discussion about increasing programmed activities is also increases demand for washroom facilities, and which is more maintenance, which is some additional costs. And we have to actually sort of balance those things. is my first comment. My second comment is just, and I know the city's looking at branding and just in terms of how you package the waterfront. The one thing that we thought was really important is as you move across the waterfront, whether you're north, south, or west, there should be an identity. There should be some elements that actually, and it can be furniture, it can be signage, it can be programmed activities, but things that actually sort of bring it all together that are system wide. I think that's a really important thing. And I think once that starts to get more developed, then the opportunities for I'll call it monetizing that brand are greater. And I can use an example of like Halifax is a good example. That Halifax was doing certain things a few years ago, and then they brought in programs about bike rentals and things like that. But those actually came in a very strategic way to create opportunities along the way that allowed private sector businesses to come in and to actually be able to use that space to generate revenue and bring the private and the public sector together. That's a good example. We sort of see that that's the direction. It's hard to forecast that, but I think that's on our radar, of course.
And Councillor Cursor.
Through you, Chair Hamilton, I just had a couple of questions about the North Shore. I see that it is slated to be looked at 2029 to 2033. This is midterm, which is further out, so I don't want to get too granular at this point. But I remember the days, and that was wall to wall to wall boathouses. And I remember that there was, if I could be incorrect on this, but I remember there was a time where there was a great push to renaturalize, revitalize the actual shoreline there. And I'm wondering if with these increased points of access to the trail along there, that if consideration will be given to the impact that will have along that shoreline. And also, for the this is an off the cuff kind of question here because of the marina conversation. I did not see, I would be really interested in seeing more information about the expansion and the ideas coming forth about the marina, because this is an ongoing conversation for years about how we utilize that, because it does a larger job than us, a better job than us, I think, with that space. So far, and also with Friday Harbor, as mentioned. There's a great opportunity there, but it's a hard balance because I believe that it needs to be balanced with the actual space of shoreline that you have. So is it a matter of going to different locations, but going out into the water as opposed to across shorelines with that is to protect the space that we already have at the waterfront. So that's a really interesting conversation to have in the future. But is there back to, now I'm just rattling on, I apologize. But about the protecting the North Shore specifically, has there been any conversations with environmental groups about how that looks like at this point?
Through you, Chair Hamilton. Through you, Chair Hamilton. I think you're going to learn more through a staff report that's on the agenda tonight for General Committee. Mr. Rankin, my colleague in Parks and Forestry, will be presenting the North Shore Vegetation Management Plan that also has additional recommendations in it about different types of bioengineering solutions and slope stabilization, as well as some remediation in other areas, and the access points are all part of that conversation that I think you'll be having this evening. Okay.
Apparently I did not do my homework. Thank you very much.
I think that concludes the questions and comments. So I just want to say thank you again. I think the level of questions and comments you received tonight is just today. It's just an indication that we are all very passionate about our waterfront and we feel a sense of pride in our waterfront. So we want to get it right. But certainly I think this is really exciting. I appreciate what you presented here this evening and look forward to the ongoing efforts in this respect. So as we agreed at the beginning of the meeting, I am going to move right to the reports of the committee. So this is 7.3 on the agenda that's in front of you, Waterfront Strategic Plan update, and Mayor Nuttall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I could put the motion on the floor for 7.3, with a deferral for the next meeting of this committee, which Madam Clerk, when would that be?
Through Chair Hamilton to Mayor Nuttall, we actually have another meeting scheduled of the Infrastructure and Community Investment Committee this month because we'd had a number of presentations that we have to get through before summer recess. So it would be June 28th is the current meeting date that is scheduled. But if you wanted to, we could just schedule it to a meeting in the fall of 2023.
And is that meeting's already fairly packed from the number of
the
presentations?
June 28th meeting?
Yeah.
There's 2 presentations currently.
Why don't we to the September meeting then?
Sorry, the motion is on the floor to defer the 7.3 item to the fall. Can I get, do I vote on that or do I need a seconder to put it on the floor? Just a mover. That's it. Now we can vote. Excellent. All those in favor? And just the committee members are entitled to vote here. So all those in favor of deferring the motion to fall?
I have a question about that.
By all means.
I just want to ask Mayor Nuttall what the purpose of the deferral would be. Like, what do we need to do between now and then?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's a couple of things. Number one is that I don't believe that we're going to get through all of the items here that we have today. There's 3 master plans on the agenda and things that I think we want to get into. The second is that I've made no secret of the fact that I think that I believe that the conversation needs to be had now with the cadets, with the Navy League. In fact, probably should have been had 20 years ago with the Navy cadets on location and what the vision is and all of those items. And so I look at a $21 million ask over the next 4 years. Does that incorporate that? Some, maybe all, hopefully. And I look at the overall master plan for the South Shore relation to that cadets, it's just not there. And so the last thing I'd want to do is to approve a master plan and then a month later come back with something that's completely different for both the West and South. I think it puts us in a bit of a tricky space on that. And for me, it's a priority. I don't know about the rest of council, but for me, that's a priority.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I do think that's a really good point. So I can support that. I'm just wondering, in the interim, will we be able to have a discussion with the Navy League? Okay.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair. We've already had discussions, some of them informal, some of them on purpose, some of them on purpose on one side. But I had the invitation to go and see some of the exercises. At that point, it was communicated very thoroughly that there's some need for change, either on the structure that exists or on the location altogether. I believe that there was a story completed by Mr. Bruton about 3 to 4 weeks ago, Bob, that discussed this exact item as well. And so if you'd like to be part of that conversation, then for sure, I've need to have a more formal one. And I think that, staff will have to have the actual formal one, but we should figure out what the ask is before we get there.
Does that suffice?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Thank you very much. I'm 100% in agreement with that.
Are there any other questions or comments in relation to deferring the motion to the fall for Mayor Nuttall? Otherwise, we'll proceed to the vote. All those in favor? All those opposed? And motion carries to be deferred until fall. All right, I'm going to jump back to the original presentation that was set to go first off. The second presentation is now concerning the Barrie Transit new network vision. I will now call upon Brent Forsyth, the Director of Transit and Parking Strategy, to approach the podium to say a few words and introduce the presenter, Dennis Carr of Dillon Consulting.
Thank you, Chair Hamilton, and thank you to committee and council members for allowing us to present today. So on the call, we have Dennis Carr, who is a consultant with Dillon Consulting. He's been our advisory consultant on this project. He has vast experience and knowledge of actually developing similar plans across the country with municipalities. And I welcome Dennis, and I'll pass it over to you to do the presentation, and Dennis will be here for questions as well as some of our staff. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Brent, and thanks very much, everybody. As mentioned, my name is Dennis Carr. I'm a partner here at Dillon Consulting Limited, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here today to present the outcome of Barrie Transit's vision and the recommended 2025 transit network. Now, before I begin, I'd like to take a moment to applaud the city and staff on this innovative approach used to develop the transit vision, an approach that balances the expertise and local knowledge of Barrie staff with the external perspectives on best practices from a third-party consultant. This approach allowed the team to work collaboratively and to challenge thoughts and ideas around process, analysis, and recommendations, and arrive at the proposed transit network we are presenting to you today. So the need to undertake this study centered around 4 key triggers. The primary reason was the need to modify the transit network to connect to the new Allendale Mobility Hub. This change in hub location will require Barrie Transit to change a number of routes that connect to the terminal and presented an opportunity to holistically look at the network and identify opportunities to improve services. At the same time, Barrie's updated official plan includes new long-term population projections and changes to land use along key corridors and greenfield areas, while changes in post-pandemic travel behavior have changed how riders use the system. Finally, the success of transit on-demand services piloted by Barrie have given staff confidence.
Sorry, I'm just going to pause you for 2 seconds just because they've just got the presentation up now.
Oh, my apologies.
Yeah, no worries. We all have it on our screens, but I think just for those in the room, it's easier for them to follow along. We've got it up. Okay, continue on. Yep,
Oh,
okay,
sure,
we're good
no
now.
problem.
Continue on.
Okay, we're on slide 2 if you're changing the slides. Finally, the success of the transit on-demand service piloted by Barrie has given staff confidence that this model can be expanded to other areas of the city to improve service in low ridership areas. The result is the development of a 2025 transit network that is phased in with the opening of the Allendale terminal. The identification of new bus stops and bus stop improvements that enhance accessibility and the customer experience, and the identification of a post-2025 network plan that aligns with the long-term outlook identified in the updated official plan and the transportation master plan. Go to the next slide. The plan began with a comprehensive engagement program. The first round of engagement was designed to better understand what is working well, what the future of the network should look like, and the key principles to service design that are important to Barrie residents. Barrie Transit used multiple tools to engage with members of the community, stakeholders, and bus operators, and received responses from approximately 216 residents from an online survey. We then conducted a second round of engagement, which was held this past winter and was designed to answer the question, did we get it right? Once again, a number of engagement activities were used, including in-person workshops and surveys of residents and bus operators. During this round, we received considerable participation, including approximately 269 survey responses and participation by over 50 stakeholders at in-person workshops. So what did we hear? You go to the next slide. It shows that during the next round of engagement, we heard that respondents were not satisfied with the existing frequency, travel time, and reliability of the current transit network. When thinking about the future, 90% of respondents wanted a new network that was quick and frequent, was reliable while maintaining existing service coverage. So that's what we aimed to achieve when we undertook this process. Next slide. In response to this feedback, we developed a hierarchy of routes and documented them into a set of service guidelines, which were brought forth to Council for endorsement in early 2022. The use of service guidelines and route hierarchies in transit planning is considered a best practice, reflecting the need to design different types of services to reflect a diversity of traveler needs, from longer distance trips that require fast and frequent service to local neighborhood trips that are more focused on access. Service guidelines also create transparency in the decision-making process as it identifies minimum design standards around coverage, frequency, stop spacing, and hours of service for different service typologies. And once again, this is a best practice that we've seen time and time again with different networks. So we use this route hierarchy and the service guidelines and applied it to the transit networking planning process. This resulted in a hierarchy of routes and services that each have a different role in providing mobility to Barrie residents. So we start out first with the Express Network, which is a new service typology that will be introduced to Barrie primarily using Highway 400. The route is designed to provide fast travel times for longer distance trips, stopping at key destinations from Park Place in the south to Georgian College in the north. The frequent transit network is the next level of the hierarchy that's focused on ridership growth. These routes are located on high density corridors or corridors that will see future intensification. The focus of these routes is to provide convenience where there's a high opportunity for ridership growth. So Route 100 is an example of an existing frequent route that Barrie Transit currently provides that is considered successful. This route will be increased from a 23-minute headway to a 15-minute headway during the peaks. As well as this, a new route spanning the Yonge Street corridor will be added between the Barrie South GO station, going into downtown Barrie, and then following up to Georgian College to complete the 2025 frequent transit network. This route will also provide high quality transit service to new residents along the Yonge intensification corridor as they move in and potentially reducing the need for additional car ownership. The next level of the hierarchy is the local transit network and transit on demand service. And again, this completes that hierarchy, and these services are designed to ensure that neighborhoods and other employment areas are connected within a short walk or roll of a transit stop. Some of the key features of the local transit network include a new route on Cundles, which provides direct service to RVH via Route 14, and a more direct connection from downtown Saunders businesses, which is a high demand trip via Route 12. Finally, we see the successful and highly popular Transit on Demand pilot, which will be expanded to other areas of the city. Transit on Demand zones are recommended in low ridership areas that would not support a frequent fixed route service. Where possible, we identified on-demand zones to provide connections to local destinations, such as schools, grocery stores, and community centers without a transfer, but also providing direct connections to more frequent fixed routes for longer distance trips. So it has that sense of completing two types of trip purposes. While these zones seem to cover off a large area of the city, they only represent about 6% of existing Barrie Transit ridership. Plus, they include expanded service into new areas such as Benson Drive Residential, Lakeside Trail Medical, Amelia Street Residential, and King businesses which previously did not have service. A final key benefit is that these improvements, including the new express network, the expansion of the frequent transit network, and the expansion of service to new areas, will be cost neutral and not require any additional operating funds. While they'll also see reduced capital budgets of about 10 million over 10 years due to the change to smaller vehicle types with the Transit on Demand service. So as we go to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about the process that we use to develop the network and some of the key benefits that we're going to see with the 2025 network. The process that we used to design the network was based on existing data as well as input we heard from the engagement process. What you see in this map is the average weekday origin and destination pairs across the city, with red lines highlighting the highest ridership from existing customers. So this is where existing Barrie Transit residents are traveling back and forth, highlighting the frequency at which they're doing it. The recommended 2025 network took this into consideration and prioritized more direct routes without the need for transfer connecting these major origin destination pairs. This step was important to improve the experience of the customer that is using the service. A second key benefit that's displayed on the next slide of this network is the overall improvement in frequent services. In the current network, which you see on the left, the majority of routes operate at a 30-minute headway or more. With the new network, you will see a large area of the city moving to a 15-minute headway. This also includes the transit on-demand service in existing and new areas of the city, which will have an average wait time and are anticipated to be 30 minutes or less. In addition to this, the southwest area of the city will also see the introduction of the express route, which will significantly improve north-south travel times within the city, and the southeast area of Barrie will see the introduction of the new frequent express route 102. A next step in the process was to measure the alignment of the new transit network against the key themes that we heard in the first round of engagement. Based on this, we found that the new highway express route improves north-south travel in the city by 23 minutes from Park Place to Georgian College. 70% of ridership now have access to a frequent transit service through a frequent transit corridor or hub connection, and this should grow with planned intensification on a number of frequent transit corridors. The service has expanded to new service areas such as Amelia, Benson, and Little Lake through the use of transit on demand. Travel times between major destinations in Barrie, such as RVH, Georgian College, and Allendale Go, have been reduced by approximately 13 minutes. And all of these improvements will be cost neutral and achieved within existing service hours. So finally, we took this back and measured, and we wanted to validate this in the second round of engagement. A draft of the proposed network was presented to members of the public, and we received the following feedback. 68 to 69% of respondents agreed that the plan improves the quickness frequency of the network. This was the primary call to action by the public, which I believe the team successfully responded to. We also targeted individuals that never or rarely use transit, and 51% of them responded by saying that the new network would encourage them to use transit. This is a very positive result, as existing auto drivers are the most difficult market to attract since they have already invested in owning their own vehicle. The benefit for these drivers comes with driving less for certain trips, chauffeuring children less to recreational activities, or deciding not to purchase a new vehicle when their existing vehicle needs to be replaced. This should help Barrie move in a positive direction to achieve the transit mode share targets that were identified in the Transportation Master Plan. So if Council agrees to adopt the new 2025 network, the next step for Barrie will be implementation. We have studied a number of best practices and identified lessons learned in network designs from across the country and understand the challenges of making large system changes all at once. Instead, we propose implementing the network into two phases. Phase 1 will occur in 2024 and will focus on the introduction of the express route network, the expansion of certain transit on-demand zones, and improvements to certain fixed route services, while Phase 2 will complete the majority of the proposed modifications and occur in 2025. The benefit of this staged approach is that it reduces the impact to customers and eases the transition when being asked to use a different service. It also raises public awareness of the larger service change that is set to occur in Phase 2 and allows staff to focus resources on specific areas of change. For the transit on-demand service, we also recommend overlapping the new service with the existing service to allow customers to ride on demand without paying a fare for 4 weeks. This overlap and free fare will help ease the transition, particularly since we're asking residents to follow a new behavior of booking rides in real time ahead of taking the trip. We feel that these steps will help successfully transition residents to the improved 2025 transit network. So to summarize, I would like to thank members of the Infrastructure and Community Investment Committee for their engagement in the transit vision. We feel that the proposed network responds to what Barrie residents are looking for and provides a good starting point for future service improvements beyond 2025 as the city continues to grow. So I want to thank you for your time, and we'll turn it over to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Carr. Appreciate the presentation and really appreciate actually the responsivity to the public's call for action as articulated in your presentation. So thank you for that. Once again, I'm going to open it up to comments or questions from committee members. Okay, seeing none, I will open it up for comments or questions. Actually, I'm a committee member, so I will comment here briefly before I open it up, if that's okay. Mr. Carr, I recognize that your map that you show goes to the South GO train, but no further. And I was just wondering if you can comment on the Hewitts Creek Phase 1 development area and timelines for transit. I know we've dealt with a couple of questions in that area from residents just in relation to the growth and all the new builds that are happening there. I wonder if you can shed some light on timelines for transit to move into those new areas. And Brent, maybe that is actually a question for you. I apologize, Mr. Carr.
No, that's okay. Thanks for the question, Chair Hamilton. So as it sits right now, we're just focusing on the existing network where we service and ensuring that we do have the same level of coverage. As part of annual budgeting processes is where we bring the expansion of service into the new lands to council. And so that's where council will consider when to add it. We have proposed it as part of the 2023 2023 operating plan, and it was deferred until at least 2024. So we will be planning to bring it back to council for future considerations in terms of timing in the future.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And a good heads up to the rest of council that that will be something we'll have to discuss, given the growth in the southeast area and some of the expectations now of new residents. I've heard from a few that it's, they've got a 2.5 kilometer walk to the nearest bus stop. So something we'll definitely have to think about going forward. And yes, Deputy Mayor Thompson.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. Just a quick question, actually, when I was reading this earlier. I remember on my first tour of transit, it was the smaller buses. It was almost like the couch to the love seat. It wasn't even worth it because of the cost. Have they changed with the EV being like if we went with some of the smaller buses because of like battery capacity and stuff? Is the prices reduced on that size of a bus opposed to, I know, like the traditional buses, there wasn't much of a savings?
Through Chair Hamilton to Councillor Thompson. So I think when you're referring to the smaller buses, there's 40-foot conventional buses and then there's 30-foot conventional buses. So it's basically the same, and it looks the same, but just a little bit smaller. Those cost differentials were quite minimal. For the transit on demand, we're actually looking at going to more of what we call our cutaway vehicles, but looks like the specialized vehicles. Those costs are actually substantially cheaper in terms of the capital costs, which is why if approved by council, and those are the buses we use, if approved by council, that's where we see the $10 million in capital savings over the next 10 years by moving to those buses versus the 40-foot conventional. In terms of EV, there hasn't been a lot of development in the market on the smaller cutaway vehicles. I think it was part of your question. That's probably coming and something that we will need to consider as we expand the e-bus program further.
And just for clarification, the cutaway vehicle, like a shuttle, like an airport shuttle, like that's what you're referring to, correct?
That's exactly right.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, I'll now move to questions from non-committee members, starting with Councillor Morales.
Thank you, Chair Hamilton. To Mr. Forsyth, could you give me a very quick refresher on transit on demand? So if like a member of the public, I know you're popular in Ward 9, so they'll come up to you at Timmy's and they say, can you explain it to me? I just want to rehash it before I ask one of my questions.
Sure thing. So through Chair Hamilton to Council Morales, the Transit on Demand is a service that you book via app. Essentially, there is a call-in feature, which is for those that may not have a phone, but essentially you book it through an app, almost like an Uber, and it basically books a trip from stop to stop. It gives you the arrival time and the destination time. Essentially it's just an expansion of our service where our same fares, whether you have a monthly pass or you pay cash fare, you'd be able to use this service, and it's integrated with our regular, what you would call traditional fixed route service, as well as transfers. So if you pay on the TOD, you can transfer on the fixed route and vice versa. And it's really, I guess, just maybe to add a little bit more, it's really an efficient way to develop, to provide transit service in those low demand areas.
Okay, perfect. And so we're in the process of developing that app. Like, we don't have it right now, correct?
No, we actually do have that app. Okay. And that app is used for what was previously Route 11. It is now used by our Transit on Demand zone, which is basically Allendale Recreation Center to Park Place down into the Lockhart community and into the employment lands, kind of in this southern area of Barrie.
Perfect. Is there an opportunity to partner with Uber or Lyft to have our version of the app in addition to also having like an integrated maybe tile option for customers in that area? I know the city has had active good relationships with Uber. I'm like excluding Lyft from them, but is there an opportunity to do that, or is the focus just to do it on our app for now?
So the focus right now is no, not to look to a third party, but to continue to use our service provider. There are synergies with that to ensure that there's smooth transitions to our main network and whatnot, but it hasn't been explored at this point.
Okay, perfect. And at this point, do you have any idea how many, what do we call those many, like the shuttles, the cutaways? Do we have any idea how many cutaways we are going to buy for the 2025-2026 kind of transition initially? I'm sure it's staggered, but I kind of want to know that initial, just because technology is changing so quick. And I know, I believe it's St. John's that has already bought essentially EV cutaways that are 100% EV. Like, they bought them like last year. And the market is just continually catching up and providing more options. So I'm wondering how many, roughly, like, doesn't have to be a precise number, but roughly how many are we ramping up to buy?
Councilor Morales, we will be adding an additional 9 cutaways and reducing our 40 foots by 9, our conventional buses by 9 over the next couple of years.
Okay. And are we at a point where we're going to miss the ability to go full EV on these? Again, I know that there's not a lot of options in the market, but like I'm pulling up here old messages that I had sent you, like, because I was excited about this. Like, New Brunswick bought the electric buses, first of its kind in North America. Now, first is not always good, but St. John's and they're standing by them. And I believe the company is Carson. It's out like across the Atlantic Ocean, like it's a provider far away, but and I know that we don't buy buses overnight. I know it takes a long time to get there, so I'm just wondering if we have the ability to maybe make some of those initial purchases EV.
Thanks for the question. And for the initial rollout, probably not in terms of the procurement. The Karzan you speak about is, yes, it is a Turkish company. There's very little in Canada. The New Brunswick model, we've talked with them actually. They are actually just leasing as a pilot right now. They're not actually owning them because they're not quite sure if they're going to withstand the Canadian winters for a number of reasons. So we're going to get more information on that as they develop it. But the turnaround time on bus purchases is usually about a year, whether it's for diesel buses. And in order to meet our timelines for the division, we would need to, or sorry, the new network, we would need to proceed with purchasing our existing cutaways, which we are going to find savings in fuel and green just by going from 40s to that. And we still need to do additional work as our facility currently would be able to manage charging of 3 vehicles. And we're going to have to do pretty significant investment in our facility before we'd be able to charge much more. So we actually are working with Electra on that to determine what that looks like, and we'll have to come back to council before we expand it any further. Just as a reminder, council did give us the direction to go and buy two fully EV buses, and those are in the procurement stage as we speak. So that's pretty much taking us to almost taking us to our limit.
Yeah. Thank you for the detailed response to Ms. Forsyth. Like you live and breathe transit. Like no one can ever just say this is just a job for you. I thank you for bringing those last points. I didn't want to discount all the great work you guys are doing with funding and partnerships for the two EV buses. A lot of members have attended. Just the only reason why I always have a sense of urgency, whether it's this or something that has nothing to do with transit, is once you buy gas, you're essentially locking in future emissions. It's kind of like replacing your water pump with gas instead of electric. You're guaranteeing those emissions will happen for 15 years. It might be the most efficient model in the market, but that's why I've always got it. Whether it's you or I ask the same questions to Barrie Police, it's always like that. So just so you know where my question's coming from, but thank you for the detailed answers.
Thank you. I'm going to move us to Councillor Cursor.
Through you, Chair Hamilton, to Mr. Forsyth, I'm really happy to see that we're doing transit and demand in the Benson neighborhood, because those were some questions I was asked at the doors in that area, and I think it's a really good fit for that area. My question is for the transit in demand. When we're looking at large infrastructure projects like, say, Sunnydale Bridge and Street Bridge, is there any consideration for using transit on demand as a supplement to ensure that buses are not held up or routes are not greatly changed that would block or affect people that are using the buses on a daily basis?
That's a great question. And over the last couple of years, and as you know, and over the next few years, we're going to have a few more bridges that are reconstructed, and we work closely with MTO on that. And actually, as part of the Ann Street Bridge, we did add a second bus, which we call kind of like a shuttle bus, which they basically added to Route 5, and individuals were able to board on each side of the highway, because the MTO has a requirement to provide pedestrian crossings when they actually kill access to a bridge. So, and they actually funded that. And so as part of the Ann Street one, it made sense to, from a planning standpoint, working with MTO, that we added that additional bus to make sure we could maintain the frequencies. It did circle around on Sunnydale, but it was able to provide that pedestrian connection for the individuals, so they could still get to both sides of the highway, and they provided it free at certain stops that individuals were affected by. The ESSA one was a little different. The ESSA one, because they left open, but they couldn't provide a pedestrian crossing. They actually provided free transit from the stop on each side of it. So if you get to the ESSA on your bike or walking or whatever, then you can actually board at one of those stops and cross the highway for free. And the MTO reimburses us for those costs. And so as they continue to look at the other bridges, those discussions will happen, and depending on how they determine to close them or leave them open and things like that, we always, or I shouldn't say we always, but we'll always be a partner if they want to make those connections, and we bring the plans to council and advise them at the time too.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks. We'll move to Mayor Nettle and then Councillor Nixon.
Thank you. I think there's some incredibly important work that's been done as part of this, this whole imagining and then proposing what the future of transit will be in Barrie. I think that there's a couple of items that stuck out to me. Number one was the express from the north to the south. I think that you're going to see a huge demand for that. I wouldn't be surprised if in a couple of years you come back and say, we actually need to invest more here because we're having so much pickup. The connection in that express route between the college and the employment base in the south end is very important. It is, an economic development driver. We know that workforce is a huge piece of why business chooses to go somewhere at this point. And I just want to say thank you for those connections taking place. And the other slide that stuck out to me was the employment access. And maybe it's the same thing as what I'm actually talking about right now. But residents have access to approximately 24% more jobs within a 30-minute transit travel time. I think that really will allow the service as a whole to become more reliable for folks to be able to access their place of work. And so I just want to say thank you, because it's a really neat lens to look at this from. The couple of the items I'd like to see some clarity on is where the reductions in service are taking place. So we're increasing the amount of on demand. So it's not necessarily a reduction in service. I'm not sure that's even fair to say it that way. And I recognize that. But in terms of the traditional service and what the communication plans are for those places. So if I look at the map as a whole for 25, and then I look at the map from 24, there's a lot of connection in the north end, and there's less connection in the south end and more on demand. And the on demand bubbles, if you will, on the map, they are much more compact than that in the south end. And so my question is that because of the level of ridership in those areas allows for a broader scope for an individual vehicle?
Sorry, through Chair Hamilton to Mayor Nuttall. Basically, yes, why there's kind of smaller areas in the north end is actually more about the infrastructure. The historic infrastructure doesn't support necessarily a 40-foot bus. And there's certain areas like Amelia Street, which we've heard from a number of years, where we have a pretty good seniors population there, and they do use our specialized transit, but there are individuals who want to use conventional and want the freedom that provides. So that's why you'll see kind of more kind of compact in that area, as well as the new Little Lake development. I forget the name off the top of my head, but we can't get Massey Way. We can't get a full-size 40-foot in there, but we can get further enough in with our cutaway buses to service some of those residents as well. So that's essentially kind of the answer to the compact versus the more broader. And when you look at our ridership, our historic ridership, and if you look at Appendix B, which is the storyboard, there's a good slide on page 4. And what we have for counselors, for those that don't know, we have automated passenger counters on our buses, so we can actually see the activity at every single stop throughout the city when people are getting on and off. And so on page 4 of Appendix B, right at the top, you'll actually see kind of a diagram with a bunch of dots on it that show the activity levels at each stop around the city. And it very quickly draws your eye to the north side of the bay, where a significant amount of our ridership is, and a significant amount of the population that uses the ridership. From the college to RVH to the Bayfield Street to downtown, very highly active stops, and that's where a significant amount of the ridership is. And then in the south, it is kind of built out a bit more. There's a little more space with single dwelling units and stuff, but with the intensification quarters coming on Essa and Yonge Street, that's where you're seeing kind of the frequent transit networks. And then you have those feeder kind of communities in around, or areas in around there that will feed into those high ridership corridors through the trains on demand and local routes. Sorry.
And then maybe if I could just jump in, Mayor Nuttall, further to your question with respect to the communications plan. So as you have seen in the report, we've really worked very hard to work on our transition plan. And we've had the experience from our previous change in our transit system many years ago. And from there, we've evolved our service, obviously, because now we have transit on demand. So you'll see in the motion that we are proposing that 4 weeks of transit on demand free for residents. And the intent there is that if you're waiting at a bus stop and your bus doesn't come, you're still going to have service that will cover that area that was traditionally in the previous system. So we think that's going to help from a customer service perspective a lot. And the other thing that we've done purposefully is the transitioning over 2024 and 2025. So it's giving a lot of time to make these adjustments. Obviously working on those express routes and all those first, then we'll have a series of communications. You'll see in the staff report, there is a small amount of money that's allocated towards communications because we know that's critically important. And our methods of communicating are going to be broad and wide. We're going to have in-person sessions. We're going to have sessions at Parkview, at Georgian College, like a lot more than just, we're not just going to be issuing a media release. So we feel pretty confident that all of these things together are going to make for a really good customer experience. And the other thing to note is that this time in our transit system, we have a lot more technology. If you look back the last time we did that, we didn't have all of our apps and My Ride and all these things we have. So all of those things will be pushing messaging as well. So we're pretty excited about this new plan and we're pretty proud of the work that we've done to come to this point.
Amazing, thank you. If I may, one more question. And I see the map now with the dots showing what you're talking about. When this comes back to general, which I'm assuming is in a couple of weeks, could we have the 23 versus 24 versus 25 to show that transition over the 3 years? And just to be able to see it, because I didn't see the 23 in there as well as 24, 25. And the final piece I'll leave with this, leave with you is this, is that I really do think that this is taking the city in the right direction on transit. And I think it's trying to cater to those who are taking and using the service. Over time, we're going to have to make sure that the balance is struck between those who are using the service and where the opportunities to expand and draw folks in. And hopefully that intensification along the Essa Road corridor, along Yonge Street, along Bayfield Street and other arteries is the opportunity to do that and draw new folks in. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, we'll go over to Councillor Nixon.
Thank you. Through you, Chair Hamilton, to Mr. Forsyth. Keeping with on demand, just a couple of questions. I guess the biggest difference between regular scheduled bus routes and on demand is the regular schedule do not require a lot of dispatching. They kind of start and have the same route every day. On demand, a little different. Are we going with, is there an automated computerized dispatch program, or we're actually going to have to hire a few dispatchers for that? So
thanks for the question, Councillor Nixon. And the answer is the app does it all. So there's a driver-facing app as well as the customer-facing app, and there's an algorithm built into the app itself that will optimize trips and stack trips. So if multiple people are booking in multiple areas, to optimize the trip. So it's all done via a computer. I'm sure there's more technical than that I probably can't get in, wouldn't be able to speak too well.
I assume so, but thanks for the clarification. And also the hours of service for the on-demand, are they going to be similar to our regularly scheduled transit?
Yeah, so that was one of the important things that we've heard is that we need to make sure that we maintain the same level of service in terms of the hours of service and span of service. So if somebody is in an area today that gets service till 9 p.m. or 10 p.m., they will continue to, whether it's fixed route or transit on demand. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Point of order, Madam Chair. I realize I actually already have the 2023 and our team's already provided it. It was under my binder, so I apologize. Thank you.
You're forgiven this time. I think we have one last final comment by Councillor Cursor.
Through you, Chair Hamilton, to Mr. Forsyth, just to follow up again on another question about the on-demand, which seems to be a popular topic this afternoon. It is a third party still that is offering that. And if it is still, is there any consideration of bringing it in-house at this point, or is it just working like wonderful the way it is?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Cursor. I would say it's operating wonderful the way it is. We have very positive feedback from the riders who are using it today. And when I say a third party is using it, so we have a third party app. So we have a technology company that's a third party that's separate from the city who provides this app in many cities across the world. And that's what we have for the app itself. But our contractor, who is a third party who provides the regular conventional service and specialized service, will be the ones actually driving the service and providing the maintenance on the vehicles and those types of things. So that wouldn't change. That piece wouldn't change. So it's just the third party app is, yeah.
So it's the technology that's third party and everything else is within house, which you are using as normal. Yes.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Just to clarify, it's a little bit confusing. So when we say in-house, our service provider is a third party MVT, so not really in-house.
Thank you, Ms. James Reed.
Any further comments or questions? Seeing none, then thank you, Mr. Carr, for the presentation. And I mean, really great questions and comments tonight, but more importantly, really great work. So kudos to Mr. Forsyth and your team, and kudos to Ms. James Reed as well for developing the common strategy that's going to go along with the implementation of this vision. Thank you very much. As we agreed, I am going to move us right into to move to the report to the committee. So again, jumping to 7.1 on the agenda in front of you, Barrie Transit New Network. Do I have to read the whole? Okay, can I have a member of the committee put the motion on the floor to be approved then?
So moved, Madam Chair.
Was that you, Deputy Mayor Thompson? Excellent.
Sorry, so moved, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from committee members? Are there any questions from members of council in attendance? No. All in favor? And all opposed? Seeing none, motion carried. All right, we have one final presentation to get into tonight. It's concerning the Facilities, Parks and Recreation Asset Management Plan. I will now call upon Scott Druitt, the Senior Asset Management Coordinator, to approach the podium to provide the presentation.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me here. Today, I'm going to be presenting to you about the Facilities, Parks and Recreation Asset Management Plan. During the next 10 minutes, I'm going to set the stage about what asset management is and why it's important. I'll update you on the city's compliance with the provincial asset management regulation. Then I'll summarize the findings of the Facilities, Parks and Recreation Asset Management Plan, including some high-level information about our assets, the service we're providing, and the sustainability of our current service levels. Finally, I'll give a brief overview of what's next on the city's asset management journey. The City of Barrie owns over $7 billion worth of assets. These assets allow the city to deliver a wide range of services. Staff across the city, as well as council, are doing asset management every day. Operations teams maintaining equipment and infrastructure, office staff analyzing asset condition data and planning projects, and council making decisions about budgets are all examples of asset management. The ultimate goal of asset management is to ensure the city's financial sustainability by making informed investment decisions that deliver city services at the desired level while minimizing costs and maintaining an acceptable level of risk. Over the last few years, the city has completed asset management plans for the city's transportation, water, wastewater, and stormwater assets. This presentation focuses on our first asset management plan for this round of updates for the remaining assets. Ontario Regulation 588-17 requires that every municipality in Ontario have asset management plans in place for all assets by July of 2024. Later this year, our team will begin work on asset management plans for the city's fleet of vehicles and equipment, and the assets related to the Barrie Collingwood Railway. After that, we'll move on to addressing updates for the proposed levels of service requirements of the regulation. And now with that overview, let's get into some details about our facilities, parks, and recreation assets. Understanding the value, age, and condition of our assets is the first step in developing a plan to manage them. This asset management plan includes about $310 million worth of assets related to parks and outdoor recreation, natural areas, and maintained parkland, as well as over $1.2 billion worth of city facilities, including corporate operations, police, fire, recreation, libraries, and theaters. Transit, water, and wastewater facilities are excluded from this plan because they've been covered in previous asset management plans. In total, the replacement value for the assets in this plan are worth over $1.5 billion. Knowing an asset's remaining life and current condition helps determine the timing of life cycle activities to ensure that it can continue to function and provide service. For the sake of time, I'm going to move through these next few slides quickly, but I encourage everyone to review the detailed state of assets section in the asset management plan to learn more. The average age of the city's facilities is summarized in the top figure on this slide. The solid blue bars represent the current average age of the facilities in each category, while the blue outline indicates the estimated service life for each type of facility. In most cases, a facility is not replaced in its entirety at the end of its service life, as its life can be extended by renewing key components at the right time. A useful way to look at this graph is to think about the components that need to be renewed or replaced throughout the life of a building. The city's facilities teams proactively monitor facility components to plan and manage these renewals. The bottom figure on this slide summarizes the condition of the city's facilities. Combined, about 82% of the city's facilities are currently in fair or better condition. Some notable exceptions including the operations center, which is in poor condition overall, and a handful of parks buildings that are in poor condition overall. The average age and estimated service life of the city's parks and outdoor recreation assets are summarized at the top of this slide. If you look closely, you'll be able to see that there are several types of assets that are nearing or at the end of their estimated service lives. On the bottom of the slide, we have the condition of the city's parks and outdoor recreation assets, and overall about 75% of these assets are estimated to be in fair or better condition. There's a direct connection between our service levels and how we invest in our assets. If we want to increase our service levels and reduce risk, then we need to invest appropriately. That means capital construction dollars and people to deliver projects. It means fleet vehicles and people to operate them. If we underinvest, service levels are reduced and risk increases. For this asset management plan, we focused on our current levels of service and began to lay the groundwork for planning based on proposed levels of service. Importantly, the asset management plan considers whether the current levels of service can be sustained over the next 10 years, including what level of investment is needed to do so. When there is insufficient funding, the city has to make choices about what work to prioritize, and we need to understand the risks so that they can be managed. This slide shows some highlights from the level of service measures that we've included in this asset management plan. The asset management regulation doesn't mandate specific level of service measures for facilities, parks, or recreation assets, as it does for some other asset classes. However, it does require us to include measures established by the city. In this plan, we've included a wide range of service level measures in order to establish a comprehensive baseline for future efforts. These include measures to help us assess the capacity, function, quality, and reliability of our assets. As I mentioned before, as we move into the next phase of asset management planning, we'll be working to establish proposed targets for our levels of service so that we can develop real plans to deliver services at sustainable levels. Putting together what we know about our assets, their age, condition, and the current levels of service they're providing, we're able to figure out the activities and expenditures needed to maintain those levels of service. Starting with growth needs. The growth needs for facilities and parks are identified from the capital budget through funding associated with development charges. Additionally, some growth needs for outdoor recreation services are identified from the 2019 Outdoor Recreation Facility Study. The city is planning to spend $408 million over the next 10 years on new and expanded facilities to serve our growing population. The majority of this planned spending is for 3 facilities, including 2 new community centers and the expanded and upgraded operations center. For parks, $38 million in new assets are currently planned over the next 10 years to address growth. These include new park developments in the secondary plan areas. For outdoor recreation, growth needs were identified from the 2019 Outdoor Recreation Facility Studies, but included a need for additional sports fields, courts, and skateboard parks. These would require an additional $26 million in new assets over the next decade in order to maintain current capacity as the population grows. Moving on to renewal needs. As I mentioned before, this asset management plan focuses on maintaining current levels of service. Therefore, the renewal forecasts presented here are based on maintaining the city's assets in a condition similar to the current state. As opposed to forecasting all needed renewals for assets at the end of their service lives, we will still have some backlog of renewals at the end of these forecasts. For facilities, the renewal needs are forecasted to cost an average of $26.7 million per year over the next 10 years. At the end of this forecast period, the city's facilities would be in good condition on average, similar to now, and have a renewal backlog of approximately $30 million worth of assets. For parks and outdoor recreation assets, the forecasted renewal need is an average of $6 million per year. And at the end of the forecast, approximately 70% of assets in this category would be in fair or better condition, and $10 million worth of unaddressed renewals would be outstanding. As you can imagine, there are some risks associated with these forecasts. For example, if one or more assets in the renewal backlog were to break down, it could result in, excuse me, service disruptions, safety issues, or other concerns, as well as costly emergency repairs. For this reason, staff will need to continue to monitor the condition of our assets with a focus on risk, and renewal programs must continue to prioritize the highest risk assets. Regarding operation and maintenance needs, our forecast is based on what would be needed to operate and maintain the new and expanded assets being constructed to accommodate population growth over the next 10 years. Based on the over $400 million in new and expanded facilities being constructed over the next 10 years, the city's operations and maintenance expenditures are expected to increase from approximately $25 million in 2023 to nearly $34 million in 2032, with specific annual increases depending on new facilities coming online within that year. For parks and outdoor recreation, maintained parkland and natural areas, the city's current 2023 budget of $7.8 million will need to increase to approximately $10 million by 2032. And I should point out that these forecasts do not include any increases to service levels or increases to address the impacts of inflation, which is already creating some challenges for our operations teams. And now what we'll look at is whether the city's planned budgets are sufficient to maintain the current levels of service over this next 10 years. For facilities, the planned expenditures in the 2023 capital plan are expected to provide the additional capacity needed to accommodate our growing population. Furthermore, the planned capital renewal expenditures averaging $26.7 million per year matches the forecasted needs to maintain the current average condition of the city's facilities. At this level of investment, there will be a renewal backlog throughout the next 10 years, so staff will need to continue to actively monitor and manage risks and continue to prioritize the most critical renewals. For parks, the planned expenditures in the current capital plan are expected to provide the additional capacity needed to accommodate population growth. For outdoor recreation assets, new amenities identified in the 2019 outdoor recreation facility study are not currently planned in the capital plan. This is expected to reduce capacity-related service levels for these assets as the city's population continues to grow. However, I must mention that for some categories of sports fields, there is currently available booking capacity that is likely to mitigate the impact by more fully utilizing existing fields. Regarding parks and outdoor recreation renewal needs, there is currently a $3.3 million annual average gap between the planned expenditures in the capital plan and the renewals needed to maintain current levels of service. At currently planned levels of investment, the existing backlog of renewals will grow over the next 10 years, and the average condition of our assets will deteriorate. This means that we can expect increased risks and service level impacts, including interruptions to services and more money potentially spent on emergency repairs rather than proactive maintenance. For all of the assets in this plan, operating budgets will need to increase over the next 10 years in order to take care of the new and expanded assets as they are brought into service. If operation and maintenance resources are not increased to keep pace with the growth in the city's assets, then service levels will be impacted. That concludes the summary of the asset management plan. Just some next steps as our team moves forward, we'll continue with the development of asset management plans to comply with applicable regulatory deadlines. This will include improving our forecast to consider proposed levels of service, and we'll be looking to work with council to identify achievable service levels across the city and make realistic plans to deliver them. This will complement our ongoing work to improve the city's day-to-day asset management capabilities by improving the data analysis processes and tools that staff and council use to deliver the city's services. Thank you for your time. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Mr. Jurett. I appreciate the presentation. I do think that this is one of the most important plans that council is going to have to be aware of and keep an eye on, and some of these gaps that you identified. Certainly, you know, again, we've got to, stick to them and be aware of them. It's a constant sort of struggle to me, balancing all the growth. We always talk about growth with really maintaining our existing assets, right? And maintaining our service levels and growing our service levels to meet the future demand. So thank you for this. I am going to open it up to questions from committee members first. And I know we had a couple of committee members that had to exit, so we only got a couple left. Okay, and I will open it up to non-committee members. Nothing at this time. Okay, a lot to digest, I think, but certainly really appreciate the presentation that you put in front of us today. And I'm sure we'll all take it back. If we have any follow-up questions, we can be in touch. So appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
As discussed, again, I'm going to move us right into the report. So moving into item 7.2 on the agenda, which is approval of facilities, parks, and recreation asset management plan. Can I have a member of committee put the motion on the floor to be approved? Councillor Rietma, thank you. Are there any additional questions, either from committee members or members of council in attendance? Seeing none, we'll call the vote. All in favor? All opposed? Seeing none, it is carried.
That concludes our update from Barrie City Hall. Thank you.